Yeah, hey, everybody. So my name is Dylan, and I've been on the core platform for quite some time. I'm working in Team Meta as a game artist. I've been all over the place. I've been doing a lot of lighting stuff actually recently, especially for all the new mobile work that Manicore has been doing. Um, so today, one of the things I'm going to be talking about is lighting, VFX, and post processing. And with Mechaverse, there's a lot of great potential for amazing lighting. And I'm going to go over as much of the lighting components as I possibly can in Core. And there's going to be a lot of useful tricks that I'm going to showcase. So let's get to the next slide. So for like the Mechaverse jam, you're going to want to try and gather some reference material and create a mood board for your like desired lighting. So I use PureRef. It's really good software. It's a really good tool for creating mood boards and holding all your reference images that you've gathered. And I have an image of it at the bottom right, like just a screenshot. And this should help you get inspired and on how far you can push your lighting in your environments. So one of the things that I also like to use too, and it's just not mentioned here, but is using AI generated content to help assist you with getting great ideas off the ground. And I noticed that AI also likes to does lighting pretty well, and it's instantaneous, as we all know. Like AI can just generate art and images pretty quickly, so it's a very good tool to use in your toolkit for when you want to try and establish what your scene will look like for source lights, the mood. And these are all great things to use. So yeah, so like the sort of like the preliminary lighting stuff, gathering your images, obviously mood board, but also blocking in your lighting. So you'll be tweaking like your skylight, your sunlight, your environment fog, everything to better match like the mood of what you're trying to go for. And while all doing that, it's also good to think on what kind of materials you may be using like in your world. So if you have lots of materials that are like reflective um, or very matte, it may affect the overall lighting in your scene. So yeah, so let's go to the next slide. And as some of you may know, lighting is often used for game design as well. And even in most AAA games, it's like one of the most notable is like guiding with light. So using light as a tool to like lead the player either through a level or to an objective, whatever you may be creating, illuminating and framing too. It's like whether if you're using like a flashlight to light a dark scene for the player, or using light to frame important game elements in your scene. These are just a couple ways of how lighting plays a role in your game. So, and like lighting with purpose, just a couple things to quickly think about when you are creating your environment. Is like, what time of the day is it? How do you want the players to feel? Where are your lights located? And as you're creating your worlds for the Mecha Jam, you just want to really think about and how you the player should feel when they step into your world. And if you're creating like if you like creating hero assets and you want to showcase those assets, it's pretty good to understand what the 3 point lighting is. So basically, what 3 point lighting is you have three lights placed in your scene. You have the key light. It's first and usually one of the most important lights that you could place in your scene. It's used. Its purpose is to highlight the form and the dimension of your subject matter. And then the fill light would be used to fill in the high contrast shadows that the key light would usually create. So it would help kind of fill in like these little darker areas more. And then we have our backlight, which the backlight is going to help um, create better contrast with the background. So these purple little highlights here vastly improves just the look and dimension of your subject matter. And going into the next slide, these aren't as detailed, but I will be getting into these in Core and just going through some of the settings. And this one is probably my favorite slide, honestly. So I like to call them lighting hacks because it sounds cooler, but there are a couple of tricks that I'm going to show you in Core on how to create some fake lighting. And these are really useful, probably my favorite to use when setting up any kind of lighting. Usually you can only get so far with like normal lighting components and atmospheric effects, but since we make video games, we can kind of cheat a little and use like decals, flare billboards to create ambient surface lighting or fake volumetric fog and lighting. So before I get into Core, I'll be going over these as well. And I'm going to try and cover as much of the lighting components as possible. And I'm going to briefly touch up on like performance cost as well. So I'm going to switch over to Core. So just give me like a couple seconds. And I'll switch and we'll begin. All right, so I don't have again, I don't have a scene set up for like a Mechaverse theme, but it is good to talk about the bare bones of a lot of the components that you can use for when you're creating your mecha scene. So I'm going to talk about the world lighting first. So in my default sky, we have the sky dome, skylight, and sunlight. And the sky dome, I think something to keep in mind is that this doesn't actually affect the lighting of your scene. So if I were to adjust like the brightness to 0 to 2, or if I said it's like 5, that's the cool thing about Core and a lot of these parameters and on these objects is that you can overdrive the value, right? So and you could pretty much do this with any object in Core, which is cool. So you may find something like a VFX or a post-process effect that you want to use, but you aren't quite happy with what it currently would stop or cap out at. And you can just push it past that and get unexpected results that might be desirable. So again, though, this does not change the color or the lighting of your scene. It is just changing the sky. So if I change like the scene color to like pink, you can see that the ground is still, well, it doesn't change at all. But that doesn't mean that you can't use this. And this is what I'm going to talk about next is your skylight. Skylight, this is probably one of the most important lighting components in Core. It's really what it is. It's an image-based lighting system that uses HDRIs. So you could imagine it lights your scene using like a cube map. And this is what actually affects the lighting in your scene. And you could also use the skylight to capture your sky dome. So it'll use the sky dome and it'll capture the sky dome as a cube map and use it for your lighting. So if I use capture sky here at the bottom, it will capture your sky dome. And you can see now that it is actually using the lighting. So like again, sky dome does not light your scene, but you can use it to light your scene if you use captured sky. It will capture your sky dome and use it as a cube map. Then I'm going to turn that off, set it back to 1. So again, skylight's very important because leaving cast shadows on it will enable distance field ambient occlusion. And what that is if you have a multiple objects like this that are next to each other, you can see ambient occlusion that occurs around these objects. Like if I put this over here, you can see it start to make it darker in here. And this is because of that distance field ambient occlusion. It's basically the distance between objects to others, and it creates darkening. So if I turn off cast shadows, you can see that that goes away very quickly. So I'd leave cast shadows on for the skylight. Very important because you get that distance field ambient occlusion, and it vastly improves just the quality and look of your environment. You can blend between images too. So if you had, let's say, like a volcanic scene, I probably can find a really underground lava cave. You can blend between cube maps um, to affect the lighting of your whole scene. And so there's a lot of this. This is a very versatile object, and it's usually a must. The skylight's a must. Um, the sunlight. Um, this one is just your directional light, right? It's your sun. So it's not like the skylight where it affects your entire scene. It's mainly whatever sunlight can cast onto. So there's a couple of things we could play around in here. A lot of this advanced stuff down here, like the shadows advance. This is a lot of performance parameters here. If you could drop this down, it'll reduce the accuracy of your shadows. But if you increase this, you can see that the shadows get crisper, very nice. Usually, I like to leave it at 2 or 3. You really don't need to push it up to 4. Again, you'll incur a cost doing things like this. The dynamic shadow distance. This is basically let's say you build a very big open world scene, and you have your shadows just do not look good on things that are far away. What you could do is just turn this up like as much as you can to 10, and it should correct the shadows that are at the distance and make them look pretty good. Shadow bias. This is a interesting setting to play with. You can tweak this to ground your shadows more. So if I can bring this down just a little bit, and you can see it's bringing that shadow here at this corner closer and closer, so it feels more grounded. But you don't want to push it all the way to 0 because you get this shadow banding effect. So I just tweak it until that just doesn't occur. Usually leaving it at the default is fine. You may just need to increase your shadow cascade count if you want better contact shadows. See what else can I talk about. I'm going to talk about the 3-point light. In case let's say you create a hero asset and you really want to show off your kit bashed asset. So this is our traditional 3-point lighting setup. So in here, and I'm also what I'm going to talk about too. I'm going to go over it is the adjustment volumes. I'm using them in this bubble here, this inverted sphere. So if you can see, if I enter the sphere, the lighting changes out here. But that's because I wanted to change the lighting as soon as you enter this inverted sphere. What that looks like here is if I go to my 3-point lighting group here, you can see all of those adjustment volumes, and they all reference the objects, like the sun adjustment volume references the sunlight. This references the skylight, and so on and so forth. I also have a vignette grain post process. So if I go in here, all of it will adjust. And, this is what the would look like. So it's really cool bike. This is our fill light. This again is used to fill in some of the shadows, and then our key light to highlight the form and dimension of our subject, and we have our backlight to create the rim lighting. So with all that combined, and I'm also just one of the fake lighting tricks that I'm going to talk about, just I'll get into it later, is like the flare build. You can see I'm using it right here. Add a kind of like, I would say like a glimmer for the front headlight, and it looks really cool. So if you're a person who loves creating hero assets and is attention to detail, just consider the 3-point lighting. Just it'll really just make your asset pop, and it's really good for renders and your portfolio. And so we went over that. over the sky dome, skylight, sunlight. Okay, so atmospherics. Now let's talk about environment fog. Really important. By default, the volumetric fog is not enabled, but this is still a useful effect. I usually turn on volumetric fog when I'm creating something, because you're going to need volumetric fog when you want to create really realistic lighting. So if I go to turn this on, you can see that everything really changes. Let me set my sky dome back. So and it's no longer reliant on like the color for the fog. It's now reliant on the directional and scattering color, and so if I wanted to make my lights have this kind of hazy feel to them, and actually like you could see them through the fog, I would increase light absorption amount a little bit and lower the beam view direction. If I increase this, it's going to make the lights, and you're going to actually see them like it's like a cone. It's like aiming at the camera. But if I decrease this, it'll kind of bring that shape back. So I'm going to set this to white. And cool thing about like the volumetric fog is that you can also adjust the intensity on the fog for that light individually. So if you don't want any volumetric fog for that light, you can just set that to 0 in on the light, the volumetric intensity. But you could slowly increase this too if you just want a little bit of fog. Again, volumetric fog, it doesn't work with if you were to like turn volumetric fog off and try and increase your light's volumetric intensity, it won't work, because you don't have a fog medium in your level. In order to, and you just enable that, and you're able to adjust the settings here, and you now have volumetric fog. So this looks really good. But sometimes this kind of effect, it is performance heavy. So you can use things like the flare billboards, for example, which is what I'll be getting into to create and fake this look. So a couple things here that all the lights have in the performance tab is the draw distance. So right now it's set to 5,000, but if I go out to a certain distance, the light will just fade out. And sometimes that might not be preferable to you. You might have a large environment, and you need to make sure that these lights appear and look really good. Far away, you can just increase this up to a point to where you can see the light again, and it still has the volumetric lighting. So you could also use distance relevance to cull the light at some predefined distance that's specified in the game settings object. Go to game settings, come all the way to the bottom. You can see it's at 45 or 4,500 centimeters that the light will no longer exist. So at low, get about that distance, it'll just pop out immediately, like there's no fade. And this, from my understanding, is that it stops existing. So this does, like, if you have a lot of lights in your scene, this is a way to kind of keep things optimized and running really well. Let's go over some of the VFX. So these are a couple of VFX I'm going to show. There's a lot of VFX. There's so much. I could be here all day explaining what they all do, but these are some of the most notable ones and things that are pretty cool. So Magic Tracer, you can imagine, obviously it could be used for like a bullet or some projectile weapon, but it can also be used for your environment. So if you're building like a world, there's some pretty cool shapes in here for the shape index. So like you're creating some mechaverse environment. You can play with the shape index, the coloring, and use things like this for like custom like image gradient. Maybe these come out of the ground in a hallway. And if you're a scripter, you can animate these too. So really, I encourage to just play with these and see what you could possibly do with these. because there's so much I can probably do with them, but I'd be here all day just working with them. So you can see already, really, really cool. It's very useful depth, fade, distance. This is also on the flare billboards. This is basically what it does. Is it blends the object with whatever it intersects it, whatever intersects it. So if I increase this, you can see the flare billboard, or I mean the Magic Tracer VFX, is starting to fade with the world. You can overdrive these 500 if you really wanted it to just fade and blend into the world. So very useful. And this here is your tile. Let me do the sci-fi trail. For the sci-fi trail, it's a very cool ribbon effect. Sorry about that. I have a bad cough. Anyways, so with this, you if you're having trouble adjusting something like this, I recommend just setting the lifetime 120, pulling it out, and you could then adjust the settings here, and it should update. So I can play with this, adjust the depth fade amount, which is really cool. Again, this will blend the object with whatever it intersects, and of course we have our colors here. We can just adjust, play with. It's something really cool here. Scale, the hotspot scale, and then when you're done with this and you like it, you can delete it, bring it back, and then create a template out. And so also another cool VFX is the object outline. So with the object outline, basically how this works is if I delete this and I go to create a new one, so if I go to drag this in, object outline, I can drop this in on my weapon, and then I can reference the parent, which is our sword, fantasy weapon sword 01 prop, and it'll now have an outline, and the outline looks through the parent, gets all the children, and applies this outline shader effect. And a very cool effect. You can adjust the thickness of your line. You can attach it to root transform. So if you're having trouble with if you're having trouble with the outline staying on your prop, you can enable this. And there's a multicolor option as well. So there's a lot of stuff. Usually, like this kind of stuff, you just play around with, mess. There's a lot of things you can do with this stuff. So I go far, it still looks pretty good. And I want to talk about the flare, the fake lighting. The fake lighting is very cool, absolutely cool. So one of my favorite objects, the flare billboard, and I use this whenever I possibly can, when I need to layer fake lighting and fog. So usually, like these shapes right here, I haven't really found use for them, but like shape number 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are usually some of the shapes that I find could be very useful. And so I'm going to show some of these settings and what they do. So again, depth, fade, distance. If I push this object into a wall, at 0, it's not going to blend, but if I increase this, it'll blend. So I can just barely adjust this, and it'll blend with the wall. And so if I want to turn this into like a hazy glow around some street light, I'll set the color so we get this glow. And I'm using flare shape 4, and this so that this flare also orients to the camera. So wherever I look, it's always looking at the camera. But that if you do not want that to happen, you can turn that off, and it'll orient in just whatever the object's orientation that it is currently. So, but you can also rotate this like now that it's no longer orienting to the camera. You can rotate it however you want. So if you want to place very specific fake lighting, so like if I wanted some subtle glow to occur at this edge up here, because maybe I have some emissive lighting, so I can increase this, and just adjust the depth fade distance, and play with the shape until I get something that's really cool. And you can quickly see how this could be a really useful effect. Again, I use this all the time, and but also it's flare billboard. That's for like floating, creating fake volumetric lighting and fog, 2D basic shapes like a decal. So I'm gonna let's say I wanted to just light up like the top of these objects here. So what I usually do is try and keep the bounding box, the projection box of your decal pretty small, and then I'll increase the emissiveness, and let's say I want to go for a cool neon kind of color. So I'll make the outer edge, like the stroke, kind of darker color, and then the inside brighter. So let's do that, and then add blur to it, a lot of blur. That way you get a more softer color, and then you can just quickly play around with this and get some really cool surface lighting. And you can adjust the opacity on these. So if you don't want this so as intense, so if you want like very subtle lighting on like your focal point, like you have like something that's, you can see how quickly this just improves the look of whatever you're making. This is a great tool for adding fake lighting and surface lighting. Like for instance, like this VFX here, I want to use the 2D basic shape decal to add a subtle glow around this effect. So I'll probably make it a little smaller, and I'll try and match the color of this object. So with some adjustments, corner around, you can see how cool that's already beginning. And you can obviously adjust the emissive if you want to go brighter or bring up the opacity. These are all things that, like I said, that I use when creating or setting up any kind of lighting. It's after I've set up my lighting with the skylight, the sunlight. And I've set up my atmospheric effects like the volumetric fog. The fake lighting is something. It's like painting your picture. You're using decals, flare billboards, things like that to just add more to your lighting. We're making games that, again, we can cheat a little. Like maybe wanted the surface of this to glow blue as well. Like there's some slight bloom. So, adjust this. Doesn't even have to come off the object. You just have it hover. Just the coloring. And adjust the distance depth fade. Some really cool effects here. How do I sound, by the way? I'm okay again, right? Like I sound good? Okay, good. All right. What else? Adjustment volumes. I didn't even cover too much on that. So, so if let's say you're going into an interior, you want to change the entire look of your level within some duration. you can use these adjustment volumes to do so. So the sun adjustment volume is a pretty good one to show. So I'm going to show that. I have it. So I'm going to reference in my sunlight object here on my adjustment volume. And I'm going to increase the blend duration to 3 seconds. So it takes about 3 seconds to switch to the new settings. So I'm going to lower the brightness, and I'm going to rotate the sun object. Now you can see the sun rotates. Now we have in the distance the sun is setting. If we exit, it goes back to normal. This is very useful if you have multiple like layers or sections in your environment. This allows you to quickly just change your entire environment lighting very quickly. And same thing with the skylight adjustment volume. It'll change the entire lighting of your scene. So if I want to increase the intensity and add a slight orangish tint to the world. Now if I step in here, I'm going to have it blend in 3 seconds. And here you can see that changes the skylight. So everything's a little bit more orangish now. And you can also adjust the settings while inside the volume too, in case you wanted to really be exact with how you want it to transition over or adjust. Now if I leave, it goes back to normal. If I enter, it'll change. Very useful. When possible, use these everywhere, especially if you're going to be entering like an interior space in your world. There's one VFX, or I believe it's post-process, that I want to show off. It's the underwater effect. Underwater post-process. This is a really cool effect. Let me just close some of these. Oh, I have it right here. So I turn this on. So turn this on. Let's say you have an underwater world, or your mecha goes for a swim. Very cool out of the box underwater post-process effect. You can switch on and off certain visual effects of your underwater post-process, like the kind of screen space ripples. So if you see, if I leave that on, at this hard edge shadow right here is kind of rippling. If I turn that off, it goes back to normal. Caustics. Caustics are the sunlight going through the water medium, and it's creating these ripple like caustic effects on the surface of your underwater zone. You can control the fog, tint, a lot of cool stuff we can do with this thing. Distortion amount. So if you really want an intense screen space ripple, it's currently using the sun's direction for these rays and stuff, for the directional caustics. So there's a lot of stuff to play around with the underwater effect. Color grading. Color grading is very important, especially for like post production. After you've created your world, your scene, this is a great way to just fine tune and adjust the coloring of your overall scene. And so you can adjust like the global the scene tint. So I'd be careful with this. I would be just subtly adjust this if you can, even like using these. I don't even think you can see the color sliders. Hold on. There we go. All right, so you should be able to see this window now. Sorry. So yeah, you just, if you're going to adjust this, you can even drag the hue, the saturation, and the value sliders to get the desired result you want. Now, with the whole advanced color grading, I'd just be very careful with it. Don't go too intense with it, depending on what you need this for. Bloom, very useful effect. We all know what bloom is. We all love it. It adds bloom. It adds this glow effect to whatever intense light source that is in your scene. And it's not even just light sources. It could be surface lighting like this. So it's like a screen space kind of trick. You can overdrive the intensity, so it'll really like make those pop. Threshold, in case you wanted to like constrict like the brightness values, and you can even adjust the coloring of your bloom. This one's a kind of weird one. It's hard to imagine what I'd use it for, but you can see what it does to like whites that are like white. But I can imagine this being a very cool effect, especially for programmers out there who can adjust these in real time. And so that's bloom. We all know ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion's great, amazing. I'd always recommend keeping this enabled in your level. So for like these lights here, I made I added some polished cubes, and with smart material enabled, I kind of added this detail in the, and this is a really good example to show how the ambient occlusion works with intensity. If I increase the intensity, this increase the intensity of the ambient occlusion. If I can constrict the ambient occlusion radius, so you see like the darkening in here in the crevices. If I decrease this, it'll the ambient occlusion will be more intense at the very like points of the crevices. But if you want a more if you want it to be less constricting, you can increase the radius. It'll increase the radius of your ambient occlusion and that effect. This, you can see this like in the corner and the walls too. And so there's a lot of settings to play around here. Auto exposure. This is actually a very cool post-process effect. So basically how it works is if you enter it, it'll adjust the exposure in screen space to whatever you have specified here. So like if you were to like go from outside to inside, or out, let's say you're going from a very dark environment to an extremely bright environment, your eyes will naturally adjust to the lighting of the environment. It just doesn't happen like instantly. It's something that happens over time. So using auto exposure is a good way to just add that realism of how your eyes would react to lighting when going from one environment to another. And so it's a volume. So you can play around with this, and like I said, if you have an interior space or just experiment with this. If you have dark places, put this over those spots, adjust the settings, and see what you can get. And lens flares. Lens flare is if you were like look at the sun, you'll see an image. Let's see if I can get it to show. There it is. So yeah, this is the lens flare effect. You can also adjust it, which is kind of cool. You can adjust the shape. Like there's a heart one. So this is basically like, okay, yeah, like here's a rainbow circle, which that's a cool one. Pentagon. So this, I believe it only this occurs with the sunlight. No, it happens with all lights. I just you can. This is a really cool effect. I would just be careful with how you use it. It should be a very subtle effect. So I'd probably use like a circle with a very low blend, and you can still see it's still there, and it looks really good. And vignette. This adds a slight darkening around the edges of your screen. Very useful for taking showcase photos if you're creating hero assets for your portfolio. So I think I covered as some of the most useful post-processing effects, lighting, some VFX. We have a couple minutes left. I wanted to make sure if we have time for questions. So is there any questions? Oh yeah, sure. Let's see here. So we go to the environment fog. It's in the default sky, spherics. I don't know if it'll work with volumetric fog. Yeah, I don't know if it'll work with volumetric fog, but it might work with just turning and setting that to black, and then you would have to play with the fall off and start. Let's see if I can even get this to work. The black color is a little is a tricky one because I've seen it happen in most VFX where if you set anything to black, it just sets the opacity to like 0, so you can't actually see it. So if I were to actually set this to a color, then now you can see it. And let's see if I can maybe get something like that. Let's at least set this to 200. Yeah, I mean, increasing the fog density to something like 200 or something crazy, it does work. But I would really play with the settings like the fall off, the start, and you should be able to simulate like darkness. And I would even like mess with the sky dome as well to better match with what you're going for. Like zenith, I would set it to like black as well, horizon black, but maybe with this slight blue. So paired with the skylight too. And these are just all settings you'd have to adjust to better to match with what your goal is with like the darkness and the fog, the skylight, the sunlight, everything. But yeah, it seems to be possible to simulate darkness with fog. You would just need to adjust all the other settings as well to kind of pair with it. You know what I mean? I don't believe there is one that's on the community content, but I can save this out and I'll drop it here for you guys to use, and you can just drag and drop it into your scene, and it should just appear. So I'll do. Yeah, we're at time, but let me do that real quick, and I'll post it. So give me one moment. What was the question? Oh, I think I already went through that, right? All right. So yeah, give me 1 second. I'm gonna do this real quick, and I'm gonna drop this PNG, which should have the template and the metadata. And you should be able to just drag and drop this image inside of Core, and it should just work. It should just transfer over. Really cool effect. I don't really use the export PNG, but it's cool. I mean, you know, right? Should decals be used sparingly? I've been told this. Yeah. Okay. So the way the decals work, anything that's within the projection of your decal is getting it's rendering pixels within this box of that decal. So this is kind of you don't want to layer decals on top of each other because you're accumulating the rendering of these two decals right here at this point. So it's like, for what you can imagine, it's like double rendering in a way. And again, like, it's try and, if you can, make a shape that tries to encompass this box, but it's not, it's going to be really hard to do that. I found some tricks with this 2D basic shapes decal. So if I have just another minute, I can show you guys real quick. If I drop in a 2D shape, it's stuck. The sides are stuck at 3, but you can set this to 2, and it's going to turn it into a line that goes from edge to edge in the box. And if you add some blur, emissiveness, you can see you get a pretty weird shape. But if you set it to 1, rotate the box sideways, so the projection is not happening, like, you can see where the arrow is. It's happening side, but if you bring this up, this is just a really useful trick that I've learned. You could have a decal that is flat. It's a really nice hard edge shape, and it's 1-to-1 with your box, your projection box. So this right here is, you're actually seeing true projection from edge to edge. Again, just, this is a useful trick, but be careful with how you layer and your decals. If you're making decals that stretch the entire level like this, it's not a good idea. You could do them, and I've done it. I'm a culprit. But yeah, generally layering them, it will get expensive. So just manage them. Be careful. Find little tricks like this to get the most out of them. And I think that's it.